London, 1847. A cold mist pressed against the gas lamps, veiling the grandeur of Mayfair in a silvery gloom. Horses' hooves struck the cobblestones with steady rhythm, and the city, ever hungry for gossip, was already stirring with a singular piece of news. Lady Eleanor Harcourt has returned. The name, once uttered in admiration, now moved through parlors like a ghost story whispered by firelight. 7 years of silence had turned her into legend, one shaded with shame, tragedy, and unanswered questions. Inside her modest carriage, Eleanor sat perfectly still, gloved hands folded in her lap. Her gown, though elegant, was understated, a dove-gray silk chosen deliberately to avoid attention, though she knew it would do no such thing. The weight of London's eyes would soon be upon her. She had been 20 when she left, bright, foolish, and in love. Now, at 27, she returned tempered by solitude, her beauty carrying the quiet dignity of endurance. The carriage stopped before the grand townhouse of the Duchess of Pembroke, where the first great ball of the season glittered with chandeliers and speculation. A footman opened the door, and Eleanor stepped into the cold air. Her breath trembled. Light from the ballroom spilled onto the street, golden and merciless. The same halls that once cheered her triumphal debut would now bear witness to her uncertain return. Inside, the orchestra's strings swelled beneath 1,000 flickering candles. The scent of roses and polished marble filled the air. Every head turned as she entered. A hush rippled through the crowd, soft yet unmistakable. Fans fluttered. Conversations paused mid-sentence. It was as if society itself inhaled and did not exhale. Eleanor's eyes moved cautiously through the assembly. She recognized faces she had once known intimately, ladies who had shared confidences, gentlemen who had flattered her youth, and yet none stepped forward. Their smiles were polite masks, their curiosity razor-edged. Near the grand staircase, she caught sight of the Duchess of Pembroke, whose jeweled neckline gleamed like armor. The Duchess leaned to whisper behind her fan, her gaze fixed on Eleanor. The gesture was small, but the meaning was vast. You are not forgiven. Eleanor's heart ached with the precision of memory. 7 years ago, this same ballroom had been her empire. She had danced with princes, laughed beneath garlands of wisteria, and believed herself untouchable. Then came the scandal, a broken engagement to a future duke, a letter that vanished into wrong hands, and a whisper of impropriety that spread faster than truth. She had fled before dawn, her reputation in tatters. Now she had returned not to reclaim what was lost, but to face what remained. As she made her slow descent into the sea of silk and crystal, a figure at the far end of the room caught her eye. He stood near the marble pillars, tall and impossibly composed, dressed in the restrained elegance that only true nobility could carry. The Duke of Wessex. His hair was darker now, touched faintly with silver at the temples. Time had carved strength into his features, yet his expression held something unguarded, something that broke her composure for the briefest instant. Their eyes met across the ballroom. 7 years dissolved between them. The orchestra faltered, the violins catching for half a note before recovering. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. The world had turned since last they spoke, yet the memory of his voice still echoed. I will find you, no matter what they say. But he had not. And perhaps, she thought, it was better he hadn't. A young lord approached her then, bowing with nervous precision. Lady Harcourt, he murmured, might I have the pleasure of this dance? Her lips parted, but no sound came. To dance would be to invite commentary, to feed the wolves that waited with poised smiles. She inclined her head gently. Forgive me, my lord. I have not danced in years. The man bowed again, embarrassed, retreating into the safety of the crowd. The murmurs swelled like wind through reeds. Then came a movement at the edge of her vision, deliberate, certain. The Duke of Wessex was crossing the floor. Conversations dimmed, replaced by a pulse of disbelief. Men stepped aside. Women leaned forward. He stopped before her, offering his hand. Lady Harcourt, he said quietly. His voice was steady, deeper than she remembered, yet beneath its composure lay something fragile, an old wound reopening. She hesitated. Accepting would fan every whisper into a blaze. Declining would shatter what little pride she still held. She lifted her chin, placing her hand in his. "Your Grace." They moved onto the dance floor as if time had commanded it so. The waltz began, slow and haunting. Her palm rested against his shoulder. His hand at her waist was formal, distant, but the distance felt unbearably small. For a moment they were no longer watched, only two souls circling through memory. "You should not have returned," he murmured, his eyes fixed just beyond her shoulder. "Nor should you have waited," she replied, almost under her breath. He glanced down at her, the faintest curve of sorrow at his lips. "I did not wait," he said, though the tremor in his tone betrayed him. The music carried them through the room, around clusters of silent spectators pretending to admire the decor. She felt the rhythm tugging at her restraint, forcing her to remember a time when his laughter filled summer evenings and her world had felt infinite. But now every note seemed to echo their separation, the life he had built in duty, the solitude she had endured in silence. When the waltz ended, neither bowed nor curtsied. They simply stood, hands falling apart with the slow inevitability of truth. The Duke inclined his head and stepped back into the crowd, leaving her in a circle of staring faces. Eleanor forced herself to breathe. The air was heavy with perfume and judgment. A woman in emerald whispered behind her fan. Another pretended not to look. Somewhere near the dais, she glimpsed a royal aide in the Queen's livery watching them intently. A chill passed through her spine. The orchestra began another piece, lively and bright, mocking in its cheerfulness. Eleanor turned toward the terrace, seeking air. Outside, the night smelled of wet stone and lilacs. She gripped the railing, her heart trembling beneath the fragile calm of her expression. Behind her, through the tall windows, the ballroom glittered on, beautiful, cruel, unchanged. Somewhere within those gilded walls, the Duke of Wessex still stood, encircled by lords and ladies whose every word weighed more than affection ever could. Perhaps he was already being reminded of his duty, of titles and alliances, of what a duke must never risk. She had returned to face judgment, not to rekindle the past. And yet, as the orchestra's melody floated into the night, she found herself whispering to the darkness, as though it might carry her words to him, "It was never you I blamed." In that moment, far across the ballroom, the Duke turned toward the terrace, as if he had heard her. The night air grew still. The city beyond the gardens shimmered faintly under the lamplight, indifferent to scandal or sorrow. But within the heart of London's glittering society, a single glance, one too brief, too dangerous, had already set a quiet storm in motion. The next morning dawned gray and unsettled, as though London itself carried the weight of what had transpired beneath Pembroke's chandeliers. Lady Eleanor sat at the writing desk in her aunt's townhouse, her pen idle above a half-written letter to no one. The sounds of the street below, the clatter of carriages, the calls of vendors, were faint reminders that the world carried on, oblivious to the slow unraveling of her composure. She had promised herself that she would not think of him. Yet every breath seemed laced with his name. When the maid entered with a sealed envelope, Eleanor's pulse quickened. The wax bore an insignia she had once traced with trembling fingers, a falcon in flight, crowned with laurel. The Duke's crest. She dismissed the maid and sat for a long moment before breaking the seal. Inside was a single ivory card, the handwriting unmistakably his, asterisk, "Meet me at dusk by the Serpentine." Asterisk, no explanation, no flourish, only the quiet certainty of command from a man who rarely spoke without purpose. She burned the envelope after reading it, though the ashes did nothing to calm her heart. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of pewter. Eleanor left the townhouse under the pretense of taking air, her cloak drawn tight against the wind. The park was nearly empty. Autumn leaves floated in the water, their reflections rippling under the dim light of a fading sun. And there he was, waiting by the lake's edge, his posture as still as marble. For a moment she simply watched him, unobserved. He seemed older now, not merely in years but in bearing. His expression carried a gravity she had not seen before, the kind that comes from years spent obeying duty rather than desire. When he turned, the formality of his bow softened into something far more human. "You came," he said quietly. "I ought not to have. Perhaps. But here you are." They stood in silence, the rustle of leaves filling what words could not. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small silver locket, its surface dulled with age. "I found this," he said, offering it to her. "You left it in Hampshire. I've kept it all these years." She hesitated before taking it, fingers brushing his. Inside lay a pressed wild rose, faded to ivory. She remembered the day he'd picked it, beneath a summer sun, before scandal, before silence. "I had thought it lost," she murmured. "I could not bring myself to let it go." Her voice trembled. "You should have. A duke must not be haunted by ghosts." He smiled faintly, though it was not amusement but pain disguised as composure. "Then I have failed at every measure of nobility." The breeze shifted, scattering the surface of the lake into silver ripples. She felt the old pull between them, powerful and perilous. "Why summon me?" she asked. "To see whether the years had changed you." "And have they?" He studied her for a long moment. "They have not diminished you, if that was my hope." She laughed softly, bitterly. "Then we are both fools. I returned to face society, not to reignite what society forbade." His jaw tightened. "Do you believe I cared for their permission?" "I believe you married their silence." He flinched as though struck, but said nothing. The truth, once spoken, had no need for repetition. When she left him, the dusk had settled fully. She walked home through fog, her heart divided between relief and despair. The silver locket pressed against her breast like an accusation. By morning, the gossip had begun. Servants, ever the unseen scribes of society, had already whispered her meeting into parlors and corridors. Lady Eleanor seen walking with a gentleman by the Serpentine. The tale grew with every retelling. Some said she clung to his arm, others that he kissed her hand in view of all London. Her aunt's disapproval was swift and merciless. "You have returned only to destroy what little decency remains to your name," she hissed, pacing the drawing-room. "You will not attend another gathering until this nonsense dies down." Eleanor endured the reprimand in silence. Shame was no longer unfamiliar to her, it merely changed its mask. Yet beneath the chastisement, a quiet fire had begun to stir, a refusal to let the world decide the terms of her existence. Across the city, the Duke faced his own inquisition. His steward delivered letters marked urgent from members of the Privy Council. Words like impropriety and danger to reputation filled their warnings. One letter bore the Queen's insignia, requesting his presence at the next court function, an invitation wrapped in command. He read them all, then set them aside without reply. When the winter ball at Buckingham Palace was announced, no one doubted the intent behind it. The Queen's gatherings were often political stages, but this one promised spectacle. Lady Eleanor received her summons 3 days before the event, a formal invitation bearing the royal crest. Declining was unthinkable. To appear would invite scrutiny, to refuse would confirm guilt. On the evening of the ball, Eleanor chose a gown unlike any she had worn before. Deep crimson silk, with a modest neckline but bold in color, a statement of quiet defiance. Her hair was pinned simply, adorned only with a single pearl. She entered the palace with her head held high, aware that every step was a battle for dignity. The ballroom glittered like a crown. Mirrors multiplied the glow of candles until it seemed all of London burned with light. Music swelled, diamonds flashed, whispers followed her wherever she turned. Yet amid the brilliance, she felt profoundly alone. Then she saw him, across the room, his expression carefully unreadable. Duty kept him distant, but his gaze betrayed what etiquette could not conceal. The Queen's circle surrounded him, ministers and titled ladies speaking in low, measured tones. For a while, Eleanor allowed herself to fade among the crowd, content to observe. Then came the accident, or so it was called. A countess in green silk stumbled near the refreshment table, sending a glass of red wine across Eleanor's gown. The stain spread like blood across the crimson fabric. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone tittered nervously, another murmured apology that sounded rehearsed. Eleanor stood frozen, humiliation rising to her cheeks. But before she could retreat, the Duke broke from his circle and crossed the ballroom in long, decisive strides. He knelt before her, ignoring every eye in the room, and offered his handkerchief, embroidered with his crest. "Allow me," he said softly. His voice carried just enough for those nearest to hear. The murmurs intensified. A duke kneeling to aid a woman marked by scandal. It was unthinkable. Yet he seemed untouched by the weight of judgment. His hand lingered a fraction longer than propriety allowed. "Let them talk," he whispered, meeting her eyes. "They've done so for years." For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed to pause. Then the orchestra resumed, the moment swallowed by the tide of civility. Eleanor drew a slow breath, her humiliation replaced by something warmer, something perilously close to hope. When the music ended, she left the ballroom without another word. Behind her, whispers bloomed anew, spreading like perfume through the palace corridors. And though she did not see it, a royal adviser leaned toward the queen, his voice grave. "Your Majesty," he murmured, "the Duke of Wessex appears to have forgotten where his loyalty lies." The queen's gaze lingered on the departing figure of Lady Eleanor Harcourt. Her fan closed with a soft click. "Then remind him," she said. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, rain began to fall, steady, deliberate, as though the heavens themselves had chosen sides. The prairie wind carried the scent of rain as the last light of day bled across the horizon. From the ridge above the valley, Daniel Holt could see the outline of the ranch, his father's old land, broken fences and all. The place looked smaller now, half swallowed by grass and silence. He hadn't been back in 7 years. The ache that followed wasn't nostalgia. It was the quiet recognition that time had erased everything except what hurt most. He rode slowly down the slope, his horse's hooves muffled by the soft earth. The barn leaned with the weight of age, and the windmill creaked, turning like an old memory. He dismounted, tied the reins to a post, and walked toward the porch. The boards groaned beneath his boots. The door was open just a crack. Inside, the air was thick with dust and stillness. A single lantern flickered on the table, its light trembling against the walls. And beside it sat a woman he had never seen before. She was young, maybe 28, her dress plain but neatly kept, her posture tense, as if she expected trouble. Her eyes flicked up at him, wide but steady. "You're trespassing," Daniel said quietly. "I could say the same," she replied. Her voice was calm, though her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "I live here now." Daniel frowned. "This land belongs to the Holt family." "It did," she said, "until the bank took it. I bought it last spring." He took a step closer, the floor whispering beneath his boots. "Who are you?" "Evelyn Ward." She hesitated before adding, "Widow." Daniel studied her for a moment. The tired grace in her posture, the small scar beneath her jaw, the way she tried to hold her ground. "You knew the land was taken from someone." "I did," she said, her chin lifting. "And I'm not giving it back." Outside, thunder rolled far off, soft as a warning. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, eyes narrowing slightly. "I didn't ride all this way to take it back. I came for something that's buried here." Evelyn's expression shifted, suspicion flickering through it. "Buried." "My father's rifle," he said. "And a ledger. Nothing more." For a moment, she seemed to consider him, then nodded toward the back field. "You'll find a fresh grave there, too. Coyotes took my goats. Had to bury what was left." He met her gaze. "I won't disturb what's yours." The tension between them hung like the charged air before lightning. She rose from her chair, moving with the cautious confidence of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "You can search tomorrow. There's no light left tonight." Daniel nodded. "Mind if I stay in the barn?" "Suit yourself," she said, though her voice softened slightly. "There's hay in the loft." He turned to go, but her next words stopped him. "You look like him." He glanced back. "Like who?" "The man in the old photograph I found under the floorboards," said E. Holt on the back. Daniel's stomach tightened. "That was my brother." Her brow furrowed. "Then you should know. Someone's been asking about him. A man in a black coat came by 2 nights ago. Said he was from the railroad. Asked if anyone had been through here lately." Daniel's jaw tensed. "He wasn't from the railroad." Then who was he? Someone looking for a debt that'll never be paid. The lantern between them sputtered, the flame shrinking low. Evelyn's gaze lingered on him, as if she wanted to ask more but knew better. He gave her a short nod and stepped out into the night. Rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. Daniel walked to the barn, the scent of wet dust rising around him. He climbed into the loft and settled among the hay, listening to the storm creep closer. Beneath the thunder's growl, he could hear the creak of the windmill and the faint cry of a wolf from the hills. He didn't sleep much. Each time his eyes closed, the same image surfaced. Ethan, his younger brother, riding away from the ranch with that cursed ledger tucked under his arm. The last time Daniel had seen him alive. By dawn, the storm had passed. Mist rose from the fields like ghosts reluctant to leave. Daniel walked to the back pasture where the earth was soft and dark from the rain. He found the old oak near the fence line, their father's mark of where the rifle had been buried after the war. But the soil there was freshly turned. He crouched and pressed his hand to the dirt. It had been dug up recently. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Evelyn stood with her shawl wrapped tight, watching him. "You were right," she said. "Someone's been here." He rose slowly. "That man in the black coat?" She nodded. "He came back last night. I saw him through the window, standing by the barn. Didn't come inside, though." Daniel scanned the horizon. Nothing but fog and silence. "If he's after what I think, he won't stop." Evelyn hesitated. "What's in that ledger?" He met her eyes. "Names. Payments. The kind of secrets men kill to keep quiet." She exhaled, the mist curling from her lips. "Then you can't stay here." "I'm not leaving until I find it." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "I have a horse in the stable. If you need to run, take it." He almost smiled. "You don't even trust me." "I don't," she admitted. "But I don't want to see another grave out back either." Her honesty cut through the cold morning air sharper than any blade. Daniel nodded once. "Fair enough." As he turned back toward the oak, sunlight began to push through the clouds, striking the wet earth in pale gold. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a hawk cried, its echo stretching wide and lonely. He dug until his hands ached, finding only roots and mud. But when he stood again, something caught his eye, a glint of metal by the fence post. He brushed away the soil and found a cartridge, spent and old. It wasn't his father's. Someone had fired a shot here recently. He looked toward the tree line, where shadows shifted between the branches. Evelyn followed his gaze. "Is someone there?" she whispered. Daniel's hand went to the revolver at his hip. "Stay behind me." For a breathless moment, the world went still, the air heavy, the fields humming with quiet dread. Then a distant horse neighed, and a figure in a dark coat emerged from the fog, slow and deliberate. Daniel stepped forward, the light glancing off the metal of his gun. The man stopped at the edge of the clearing, face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. "Well," the stranger called, voice low and gravelly, "seems the Holt family reunions come sooner than I thought." Daniel's grip tightened. Evelyn's breath caught behind him. The morning sun burned through the mist, lighting the space between them. The wind shifted. The valley held its breath. And just like that, the past Daniel thought he'd buried rose to meet him again.